All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the WC3 and WASI standardization webinar. Today, I'll give a short introduction to how to standardize different parts of WebAssembly and WebAssembly system interfaces. Let's say you want to make modifications to one of these two things. How do you go about actually standardizing these? So the first question you need to ask yourself is, are the changes that you want to standardize, are they changes specifically to WebAssembly or to the WebAssembly system interface? Because these are slightly different standardization routes. These have slightly different standardization routes. For example, in core WebAssembly, that focuses on core WebAssembly features that are also useful to browsers. For example, if you want to add new instructions for wide arithmetic or rounding numbers, if you want to change how WebAssembly memory works, or if you want to change how WebAssembly control flow works, these are parts of the core WebAssembly feature set, and so these need to be standardized as core WebAssembly features. These need to be useful to browsers because as part of the standardization process, you will need buy-in from a few of the browser partners. However, if you want to change something to the WebAssembly system interface, these can be changes that are not useful to browsers. Things like more extensive peripheral APIs like USB, I2C, or GPIO, messaging APIs like HTTP or messaging, or OpenTelemetry, for example, or accelerator APIs in order to accelerate crypto operations, machine learning outside of the browser, or parallel computing outside of the browser. If you want to standardize WebAssembly core, this needs to be standardized as part of the WebAssembly Community Group of the W3C, and this needs buy-in from browser vendors. This is basically to standardize core features of WebAssembly, like changing the instruction set or the memory model, and this follows the WebAssembly standardization process. If you want to standardize something of WASI itself, of the WebAssembly System Interface APIs, this needs to be standardized as part of the WASI subgroup of the WebAssembly Community Group. This is done with the W3C in collaboration with the Bytecode Alliance, which mostly have non-browser partners. And this standardizes things like WebAssembly system interfaces and the component model itself. And this needs to follow the WebAssembly system interface standardization process, which is different from the WebAssembly standardization process. So first, a little bit of introduction to the organizations involved. Basically, who do you need to join in order to be able to build these standards? So WebAssembly within the W3C has basically two groups that are important for standardization. The first one is the WebAssembly Community Group. This is a group that is public, open to all, and without a fee. Even if your organization doesn't have a paid W3C membership, you can still join this group then as an individual member. This is the group that actually creates the WebAssembly standards and the WASI standards. And this is the group that you need to join in order to work on the WebAssembly and WASI standards. You can go to this URL in order to get more information and see a button in order to join this group, basically. Then the second group is the WebAssembly Working Group. This requires paid membership in order to join. But the only thing that they actually do is that they rubber stamp WebAssembly standards created by the community group. So if you want to create the standards, there is actually no need to join this group. They're just here in order to ensure that W3C process is being followed. Most W3C standards actually work differently. In most W3C standards, it is the working group that is developing the actual standards. But for the WebAssembly community, they wanted to have a more community-focused development process for these standards. And so the working group is basically just rubber stamping the standards that have been created by consensus as part of the community group. Then you also have the Bytecode Alliance. The Bytecode Alliance is an industry association working on WebAssembly beyond the browser. They maintain the edge runtimes like Wasmtime, Whammer, and the CraneLift compiler. They also organize some of the conferences, and they are organizing the WASI workshop in collaboration with the Elastic project. Membership of the Bytecode Alliance is completely optional for working on WebAssembly and WASI standards. Then the standardization process itself. Both the WebAssembly and WASI standardization process use a phased process, with each phase has entry requirements, and then at the end of that phase, you vote in order to move towards the next phase. So basically, you develop your proposal until it meets the requirements of the next phase, then you add a phase vote to the next meeting agenda. Then in that meeting, you explain your proposal and the progress, and then if everyone agrees with the progress, then you hold a vote in order to move to the next phase. Now, what these phases are specifically differs a little bit from whether you are standardizing WebAssembly or a WebAssembly system interface. This is the process for WebAssembly itself. You can also read this process on GitHub. I've created a short summary of the most important parts, but it is each phase has a little bit more to it than what I've written here. The first phase is basically a feature proposal. In order to be able to start phase one, you need a general interest in the community group in order to for this proposal, and the feature that you want to add needs to be in scope. It's basically if someone is interested in working on a certain feature, they go into phase one in order to indicate that they are interested in working on it, and they start developing the feature. The goal is to reach broad consensus on what the proposal, what the feature is specifically that you want to have. Then you go to phase two. In order to get into phase two, you need a precise and complete overview of the feature you want to create and have a reasonable consensus within the community group on that feature. And then in phase two, this is where the actual prototype implementations is starting, and you start to build some tests and a test framework in order to actually hash out what this feature would look like on a technical level. Then in order to move to phase three, you need an updated test suite and some implementations of that feature and broad consensus on those implementations. And then the goal of phase three is to have full implementations and tests in at least 2 browsers. So this means that basically if you create a feature that is not interesting to browsers, you will never be able to move beyond phase 3, because in order to move beyond phase 3, you need implementations in 2 browsers. Then once you have an implementation in 2 browsers, you can go to phase 4. The other entry requirements is that at least one tool chain, at least one compiler supports your feature. You have a full specification document, and you have full consensus in the working group that this feature is correct. When you vote to move your proposal to phase 2, that is basically the handoff of your proposal from the community group to the working group. And so the goal of phase 4 is for the working group to confirm that the proposal is feature complete, to notify the browsers that they can ship this feature, or to see that there is an issue with the feature and then send it back to one of the previous phases. Then the WASI standardization process is a little bit different. In phase one, this is still the feature proposal. If you want to start working on it, create a vote to move it to phase one to signal that you will work on it. The goal is to develop the proposal and demonstrate viability. Then you can move to phase two once you have, first of all, portability criteria documented. So because in the WASI standardization phases, we do not require implementation in browsers, each proposal itself basically needs to say, where does this need to be implemented in order to be able to move further in our standardization process. So for example, for some of the interfaces that we are developing, the portability criteria might be that it needs to work on a microcontroller with at least 500 kilobytes of RAM, for example. In order to show very clearly, those are the types of devices, those are the types of environments that we are targeting with this feature. And you need a width description of the API in order to be able to move towards phase two. The goal of phase two then is to get one or more implementations depending on your portability criteria. You can move to phase three when the portability criteria either are completely met or there is a clear and reasonable plan in order to meet these portability criteria. There is a general consensus on both the width description and the portability criteria, and you have a mature and stable API. This last one is very important in the standardization process because basically once a proposal enters phase three, all changes that happen to it should be backwards compatible. The goal of phase three is basically to build the implementations and to add your support for your interfaces to the different tool chains. This is currently the most mature phase possible for WebAssembly system interface standards. All the WASI standards that are officially part of WASI are those that are in phase three. What phase four will look like for WASI is not yet determined because WebAssembly as a community is still trying to figure out how can we standardize things without actually requiring all browsers to implement these features. And so the process and the requirements for phase four will be created in collaboration with the WebAssembly Community Group in order to figure out what a phase four would look like for WASI standards that might not be relevant to browsers. Then the question is, if you want to create a WASI interface, the first step is to add your proposal to a WebAssembly system interface meeting. So the first thing you need to do in order to add your topic to a WebAssembly system interface meeting is to join the WebAssembly Community Group. You can join this either with your organization if your organization is a paid member, or you can join this as an individual if your organization is not a member. Then you need to find the next meeting. You can find the next meeting in the W3C calendar. This contains both the WebAssembly Community Group meetings and the WebAssembly System Interface subgroup meetings. If you want to create a WASI interface, you need to add it to the WebAssembly System Interface subgroup meetings. Then you add your topic to the agenda of the next meeting by creating a pull request on GitHub that edits the markdown file of that specific next meeting to add it to the agenda. Then attend the meeting and using the link you received after registering for the meeting in the W3C calendar. Though that calendar will show often a Zoom link in order to join the meeting. And then on the meeting, you can explain your proposal, and then you can have a vote whether or not to move to a next phase. In order to show what a WebAssembly system interface proposal looks like, I will walk through the WASI SPI proposal just as a short example. So the name of this proposal is WASI SPI. This is all lowercase. This is important. All WebAssembly system interface proposals should be all lowercase, even if SPI normally is written uppercase. So this proposal, once you move to phase 1, you receive a GitHub repository within the WebAssembly organization in order to create your proposal. In the README, you basically talk about the goals, the non-goals, the design of your API. Maybe you can have a walkthrough that explains how to use your API, and you explain who are the champions of this proposal. The champions are individuals who are moving this proposal forward. If you, for example, have students that create proposals, the WebAssembly system interface subgroup explicitly asks to, at the very least, also have full-time employees as champions in order to ensure that the proposals continue after students end their academic career. Then you have the specific interface definition. The interfaces are described using WIT. WIT is a cross-language interface type language in order to describe basically WebAssembly system interfaces using, at a very low level, it resembles Rust or C types a lot. And this interface is basically the API that then two components will use in order to talk to each other. For example, the API between a WebAssembly host that wants to talk to an SPI device and the runtime itself that then translates the WebAssembly system interface for SPI into native platform-specific interfaces. In order to then talk to the SPI device. The implementation of your interface, for example, the host implementation in the runtime, these need to be in a separate repository. These are not part of the standard itself. These are separate implementations. It is very useful in order to then link from the README of your proposal to the implementation repository where people might find the host implementation and ideally also some guest implementations of components that actually use this interface in order to show some demos. There are a lot of cool places to get support and make friends within the WebAssembly community. If you're working on WebAssembly beyond the browser, then the Bytecode Alliance Zulip chat is the best place basically in order to get help. This is free to join. You do not need to be a member of the Bytecode Alliance in order to join this Zulip chat, and it is the best place to discuss this. There are a bunch of very smart engineers and developers of WASM-time, developers of component model and WebAssembly system interfaces that are happy to help you, especially if you're using WebAssembly in weird places. They are always interested in those things. Then the community also has official meetings, the WebAssembly Community Group meetings and the WASI subgroup meetings. The WebAssembly Community Group meetings are used to discuss and vote on core WebAssembly proposals. I think it's maybe twice a year, there are physical community group meetings that often also have a co-located WebAssembly Research Day event organized by Carnegie Mellon University. The WebAssembly Research Day event is interesting for more cutting-edge, innovative work that might not be ready for standardization, but that you would still want to talk about. It's great to show it on the WebAssembly Research Day. However, However, the community group meetings are often dominated by the browser vendors. So that's Safari, Chrome, Edge developers, and Firefox developers. They are the main ones driving these proposals and the main ones driving these meetings. The WASI subgroup meetings are for discussing and voting on WebAssembly system interface proposals. These are dominated by non-browser partners, and you can get a link to attend either on the GitHub or in the W3C WebAssembly calendar. Then you have unofficial meetings or industry conferences. WASM.io is the biggest WebAssembly industry conference. It is organized in Europe, in Spain, and you also have WASMCon. WASMCon is a smaller WebAssembly industry conference, which is often co-located with KubeCon. So this year, I think we had it in London, but it often is also co-located with United States KubeCons. I can highly recommend to go to either one of these conferences. They're still small enough, in my opinion, that it is very easy to talk to the actual developers, to the actual people leading these community groups, and they're a very friendly bunch that will welcome you with open arms to do interesting stuff with WebAssembly. All right, that was it. I'll stop the recording of the webinar here.